I think if you look online, I've been working, I'm quite a ways ahead of where we are. For those of you that in the past were complaining before, or wanted to have more of the, questions early, now you can work way ahead. And I've been thinking a little bit about like what to do. I think we'll just kind of continue with the Gospel of Matthew. I don't know that I'm going to be able to host something in the summer because I don't know how that calendar is going to work yet, but we'll get there eventually. So I think I'm done through I've worked on through chapter 16, something like that. And it's amazing because there was a time that I think people would have thought, I would have thought, having 70 pages of notes on one gospel was a lot. And now I think I'm working on page 120 or something. And still only halfway through the gospel or so. There's just a lot of stuff to ponder as we move on. So we had the great calling of Matthew. I think that was one of the big events in chapter 9. Jesus came to heal and to seek and to save the lost. And one of the questions that I've encountered more and more as I've been working with the gospel is who is part of Israel? What does it mean to be part of Israel? What does it mean to be seeking the Messiah? Because Matthew has all of these times where he's going to draw a contrast between people that shouldn't be seeking the Messiah because they're not Jewish or they're Gentiles or they're further out, and then the Jewish leadership who are kind of his antagonists, where there's a lot of back and forth between Jesus and the Jewish leadership. And so it just provides this interesting context, this interesting place of stopping to think about what does it mean to actually be part of Israel? What is saving faith? Because I would propose that the gospel is very strongly making the argument that to be part of Israel, to have saving faith, is not to be genetically Israelite, but is to come to discover Jesus as the Messiah. And you can see this already changing in these kind of chapters. There's this profound change in what you expect. So, for instance, in this chapter, we're at the beginning of chapter 9, or in the middle of chapter 9. This is on the top of page 72. A ruler of the synagogue comes, a leader of the synagogue. And this is unique because one of the other things that I hope you're starting to get the flavor of in Matthew is that, and I think all the Gospels work this way, they kind of operate on the level of what we would call a paradigm or a pattern. Jesus rarely does miracles more than once for a single group of people. Very often you have, Matthew has a feeding of the 5,000 and a feeding of the 4,000. And lots of scholars at one time would have said, well, this is just a repetition. Someone got the numbers wrong. It's the same event. But Jesus seems to point out that it's something that happened more than once. And if you follow it carefully, one of them seemed to happen in a Jewish area, and one of them happened in a Gentile area. And they use different numbers and different groupings of the people that kind of highlight that. Here, I think this is the first time where we've had a leader of the synagogue come to Jesus. Where, usually in the gospel, the Jewish leadership has been very antagonistic of Christ. They've been kind of at loggerheads. He doesn't seem to support their interpretations. They get upset with him. He breaks their traditions, and they get all bent out of shape. one of them that I just can't help but marvel at, this is a bit more in the Easter season and the Gospels that we heard over the last few days, but the Jewish leadership they arrest Jesus, and they have all these things that are just so odd. So they won't enter the praetorium of Pontius Pilate because they don't want to be unclean for the Sabbath. So they're following this tradition that they have that you can't go into a Gentile's house or a Gentile area, but they're plotting to kill someone. Like, they're plotting to kill someone, and the irony is just dripping. Like, they give this money to Judas, and then Judas gives the money back, and he says, I have betrayed innocent blood. And they have a debate about what they can do with the money, because they say this is blood money. And they're not bothered by the fact that it's blood money. They're bothered by the fact that they're like, well, we can't donate it to the temple. Like, we can't give it to God. We use this to, like, kill someone. And again, it's just like, it's what you can see, I would say, is the exact critique that Jesus has. They care more about their traditions, they care more about their interpretation and their understanding than the laws of God. They've set aside the laws of God. They've set aside the 10 Commandments. They're not bothered by the fact that they betrayed an innocent man. They're not bothered by the fact that they roused up a crowd to lie, which is another one of the 10 Commandments. They're bothered by the fact that they can't figure out what to do with the money that they used to betray someone. And what you can see is this kind of, like, it's possible to get lost in legalism. It's possible to get lost in trying to fulfill a set of rules. And I think this can happen even in Catholicism. Many of you grew up in a generation where it was much more like that than it is now, where there were sets of rules and the rules were complicated and people were always trying to figure out how to follow the rules. And it's not that rules in our faith are unimportant, but that there's a heart behind it. There's a difference behind it. Like one of them is the rule of fasting before Mass. If you're not feeling well or you're feeling lightheaded and you choose to eat a few bites of food before you come to Mass so that you don't faint, that's not breaking a fast. That's being intelligent. Like, that's using your brain. Those kind of things you have to be ready for, because it's easy to get caught. Well, you ate food before Mass, and it's like, yeah, well, it was either eat food or probably faint or get sick. I chose to eat a little bit so that I wouldn't faint and get sick. And sometimes, as a priest, you have to remind altar servers of this. You get some of them in the morning, and they come, and they look a little pale. And usually, if they look like that, when they show up, I would ask them, have you had anything to eat before Mass? Have you had anything to drink before Mass? If the answer is no, I would often give them a little bit of food if I had some. Because, again, a kid on an empty stomach that's kind of anxious about serving Mass and doing it right, that's a recipe for an appointment with a concrete floor. And so there is a sense where it's like we have to be careful of trying to follow rules as best we can because they're given to us and there's reasons why they're given to us. But it's ultimately not for the sake of the rules. It's not a list of legal terms that you have to follow. And that seems to be what the Pharisees get stuck in. They have debates, well, when does night start? Well, does it start when you see 2 stars or 3 stars? And 3 stars or 4 stars. And they have debates about these kind of things for hundreds of pages in a work called the Talmud. What does it mean to do work on the Sabbath? And they spend all of this time trying to figure out what is work and what isn't work instead of actually honoring the Sabbath. Instead of actually seeking the Lord. If you take one step too many, that's higher than their count that they've decided is work, what is that? Like, oops, I forgot to count one of my steps. What my point is that when Jesus comes, he's bringing a different viewpoint on faith. He's bringing a different understanding of how faith works. He's doing something that isn't quite the same. And so it is really unique that we have this leader of the synagogue who comes, and he's one that exhibits profound faith in Christ, even that he can raise the dead. His daughter has died, and he goes, or his daughter is very sick. I forget which one Matthew has, but it's either that she has died or she's very sick and she dies while he's on the way there. And so Jesus sets off. I mean, think of this, because again, we easily take this out of context. But how many of you go to funerals thinking about God raising the dead? I mean, for most of us, that would actually be kind of terrifying. You went to a funeral for a dead person and they weren't dead at the end of it? But you can start to see that, like, this is actually the core event of the Christian faith, that Jesus rises from the dead. But here, the synagogue official is doing something that is really amazing, because he believes that Jesus can raise the dead. And that, I mean, that's a very different kind of faith. You know, when you think of going to funerals, when you think of just the encounters with death that we have and the struggle with it, I hope it's a little bit jarring for you. I hope it's a little bit like, I don't know, would I have faith to go to Jesus like that? I mean, usually we think of dead people as dead. You know, once you've died, that's kind of it. And here we have a guy who thinks of Jesus is able to raise the dead. So Jesus and his apostles are on the way to this man's house. And this is one of the things that I think The Chosen shows really well in the episode where he meets the woman with the hemorrhage. Is like there's a blob of people around him. I remember being in Jerusalem, and we were there for this Jewish festival. And I had never been in traffic jams that didn't involve cars. That literally just involved so many people that you couldn't fit through, like the narrow alleys and the narrow ways, because there were, I don't know, several 100,000 Jewish people that were coming to Jerusalem while we were there at the end of September that year. And the concept of personal space was out the window. I mean, it raises how odd the question is when Jesus says, like, who touched me? It's like 10,000 people touched you. What do you mean? Yeah. You know, this idea of like living in a bubble where you don't have anyone around you is very foreign to this land and this place. I mean, cities were small because you had to build a wall around it for protection. And so it's just not very big. And here too, so it's in the context of this story of going to heal the synagogue ruler's daughter. And you have a woman who has been sick with a hemorrhage. Again, I don't remember if Matthew includes the details, but at least in Mark, or in some of the parallel places where it shows up, the same story. It's like she's been sick for 18 years or 20 years and had struggles with flows of blood. I think one of them even mentioned she spent all of her money on doctors and they did nothing. Some of us think of healthcare problems in the modern world, and again, here's a document that's 2,000 some years old and people still spent all their money on doctors. So the woman, it says he touches the tassel of his cloak. This is one where we have to be a little bit careful because we don't wear cloaks with fringes. It's just not a thing. As one person said, even like priestly vestments, Monsignor Wald would say this. He's like, why do they have fringes at the end of it? That just means you're going to step on it and rip it off. Everyone wants fringes and frills and all these things, and he didn't like them. Or if they had them, they had to be like short so that you wouldn't step on them. But what it's probably talking about is the kind of prayer cloak that Jewish men wear. It's called a talit. And I put a picture of a young Jewish boy here in the notes because you can see down by the bottom of the picture the tassels that are hanging off. Those were they're symbolic for like following the commandments of God. I think there's something like between the 4 tassels on the ends of the cloak, there's like 643 knots or whatever the Jewish leadership decided the number of the commandments was. But it's something special. It's unique because it's actually a garment that you wear for prayer. Orthodox Jews today, like this young man probably is, have extended a lot of those prayer things and a lot of the things that the Old Testament says about priests to daily life. But it's probably something like that, like the fringes of his garment. So it's not just like she reached out to catch the edge of a long robe-like thing. It's probably more like she reaches out and touches these prayer tassels. And again, there's a kind of faith that's being shown here. So the synagogue ruler thinks that Jesus can raise the dead. She thinks that all she needs to do to receive a miracle is not even for Jesus to say anything. He doesn't even have to do anything. If she just touches his tassel, that will be enough. And so it's really kind of revealing a depth of faith. Like we have 2 stories that are sandwiched next to each other that are both profound examples of faith in Christ. They're both the kind of story that should give us pause to ask, like, do we have faith like this? The battle with ritual uncleanness. This is one that is also a little bit hard for us to understand because we have a different approach today. So in Judaism, flowing blood made you unclean. And so having a continual flow of blood meant that like she probably couldn't go to the synagogue. So it's not just like she has a condition that's painful or she has a condition that's causing physical problems. It's also like she's cut off from an ability to formally pray to God. But again, what it's showing is really, really fascinating because this woman who's cut off from being able to go into the synagogue and participate in the Jewish liturgy is demonstrating greater faith than those who do go to the synagogue and participate in the Jewish liturgy. And so you can see kind of the reversal, how it's changing how it feels. It's changing a sensibility of what it is. Like it's pointing to, you're a child of Israel, you have faith in God. Like that's something that comes from inside of you, and if it's exterior circumstances, in her case a flow of blood or paralysis like some of the other people that Jesus heals, like those don't stop you from encountering God. What stops us from encountering God is our own, ideas of the Lord, our own failures, our own sins, our lack of faith, our lack of desire to seek Him. So we have to be a little bit careful of this because when you find these cultural shift things, it's just, I find it good to say to myself, this would work differently than it would for us. Because the challenge is, you could say, well, maybe it's like people who can't receive Holy Communion because they're in a second marriage and so they're excluded from communion. But the challenge is that that's people who are in a life state who have made choices that are not good or that are breaking commandments, that are violating the law. She doesn't do anything wrong to have a hemorrhage. It might be, you might be able to liken it to someone, let's say, who has epilepsy and just can't go to a church because they might have a seizure and have an episode or something like that. It could be more along those lines. But in whatever way, she is much more formally excluded from Judaism than people like that are with Christianity today. So Jesus shows himself to be greater than Old Testament prohibitions. He's not bothered by touching a woman with a flow of blood. Again, that would make the person who touched the woman unclean as well. And so it's like one of the beautiful things about Jesus is that putting things in right order, healing flows from him to other people. In the Jewish world, it was like uncleanness could flow to other people. Uncleanness could spread, sin would spread. And that very much happens too. But even in our world today. But in Christ, his healing, his cleanness, his capacity to bring things into order, to bring restoration, is what he shares with people around him. And so it's just fascinating that, like I said, there's a stunning parallel between the synagogue ruler's faith and the woman with the hemorrhage. And when you encounter things like this in the scriptures, when you get what is called a juxtaposition, where two things are put next to each other, try not to think of it as just random, but try to ask why. What does it say? Because again, the scriptures are often layering stories next to each other and in a sequence to convey a meaning. It's not just accidental that two stories appeared next to each other. There's meaning to it. We have two of these really strong demonstrations of faith. And what happens in this episode is you have a preview of the synagogue ruler's daughter, and then you have this sort of aside that happens with the woman at the hemorrhage, and then it goes back to the story of the synagogue rulers, and it names him. So Jairus' daughter. This is one of the funny things, because he or his family or his wife has hired these people that are professional mourners. And that would be strange. I don't know what it is. Like, this again is not very much part of our culture. But in some cultures, like funerals are difficult because there's like this dramatic wailing. Like, it's normal for people to bawl their eyes out and sort of writhe around on the ground and do things that we would raise our eyebrows at. It's just not a very cultural thing. If you go to a place that's very Hispanic, it's odd because almost all the men will come with these super dark sunglasses. They'll wear these dark sunglasses the whole time because it's like they don't want other people to see them cry. And there's different cultural things. So in this case, his family or his wife or someone has hired these professional mourners who come and like wail loudly and play music and sort of make a to-do, because I don't know why you would do that. That just feels odd to me. And again, you don't have to try to fix the scriptures. You don't have to try to say, well, like, I just don't understand. I can't put that in right order. Why do you have professional mourners? I don't know, that's weird. You know, I hope that you guys aren't hiring professional mourners when you have a funeral. Because funerals are odd like that. The ability to stop and to cry, to have an open heart, I think is a good thing. The ability to encounter other people, sometimes even in sorrow. Have you all seen the movie Inside Out? It's a kid's movie, and one of the big lessons from the movie is that sadness isn't a bad thing. Sadness can motivate good change. Sadness can motivate connection. Things that can be painful actually can lead to our greatest growth. It is a fun little kids movie. I think it's a Pixar movie, and they did a good job with it. It has a lot of good things to say. So,
I was just going to say, when you talk about emotions, because and probably in different parts of the world, because even like on Good Friday, Father Cruz was saying that he expected people sometimes to be a little more emotional, because he said, like in India, they are, like there's more weeping, and he's just like, yeah, people are like, well, kind of stoic here, right?
We come from a bit more stoic culture, and I think it's good to say that neither culture is bad, it's just different. Sometimes there is too much stoicism, and there is this inability to have your heart exposed or to be vulnerable, or this fear of being seen by other people in a particular state. And sometimes there are things like that need some correcting. But in a lot of cases, it's just a different culture. One day I would love to go to an African liturgy. Because in much of Africa, like the procession with the gifts at Mass takes like 20 minutes because they dance and they collect things and they dance like all the way forward, and different groups of people come and they dance. And in our culture, that would feel very out of place. It's like, why are you doing this at Mass? But again, I think it's not necessarily better or worse, it's just different. And those kind of cultural things can really bring a lot deeper meaning to us. They can help highlight some things. So at the very least, someday in African liturgy, but not today. So, Jesus claims authority over death. She is not dead but sleeping, and the people make fun of him. And again, he's not really bothered by that. So he goes in, he keeps, I think this is one where he keeps just a few of his apostles with him, and he takes her hand. There's this kind of tenderness to him that I think this scene really demonstrates. He takes her hand, he probably reaches out and caresses her face a little bit. He says, "Little girl, arise." One of the things that's odd, because Matthew's gospel is one of the I think it is the longest gospel. If it's not Matthew, it's John, because John has some really extended chapters. Matthew has 28 chapters, so it's certainly the most chapters in the gospel, but as far as the number of words in it, I'm not sure which one is longest. But what's odd is Mark has fewer stories than Matthew, but when Mark tells stories, he tells them with more details. Matthew tends to skip out on things. So there are some things in Mark, I think, that we would usually put as part of the story, that like he takes her hand, he says, "Talitha cum," little girl, arise. She does. But what is important to see is kind of the crescendo that's been happening in the life of Jesus. Like, these miracles are one story after another, and it's just kind of hammering in who he is. And now it's reaching a place where he's capable of restoring people to worship with God. He's capable of bringing people back from the dead. How much further can you go than back from the dead? And so people around him are starting to, he's starting to have a movement. He's starting to have a following. And this is probably what discourages the Pharisees the most, or what pushes them the hardest, is his followers are growing. His following isn't shrinking. It's like each miracle and each thing that they see, more people are coming to believe in him. He demonstrates great capacity for power and great humility, great meekness. Like, this is one of the things that is really surprising. If you look at people today who have a healing ministry, very often it's dramatic. You know, it's out front. It's like you want people to come. They ask for donations right away. Some of you lived in the age of, there was some televangelists that would do this, and they do these dramatic, miracle things, and they do all this stuff. And it's like, Jesus, when he heals, it's so simple. It's so quiet. It's so much in the background. He's not looking for attention, and in a way that lends credibility to it. He doesn't build a 2,000-foot high stage and, have all these people around and fling someone out, rise from the dead and fling them 50 feet in the air. He's quiet about it. And I think this is true of real holiness. Real holiness, seeking the Lord, loving him, isn't something flashy. It's not something that is meant to be seen. Sometimes there are beautiful displays of devotion or of faith, but they're done because of love. They're done because of something genuine, not to be in front of people and be seen. And so I would encourage you, if you see televangelists today, if you hear stories of this, just think to yourself to take a step back. Is the person doing this to be seen? Do they want to be in the middle of things? Do they want to be kind of the center of attention with the world around them? Because very often what has happened later is that those people have been exposed as frauds. It's happened to many of the televangelists. There was a really famous healer in Brazil who was like this, who gets kind of this weird following, and then it came out stories of sexual abuse. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't take too long. You don't have to think too hard about how and why that would happen. That culture of adulation and wanting to be seen. I think we see this in American politics. One of the funny things they say is it's really odd what happens when the cameras turn off and they're not in front of people anymore. People have talked about political gatherings and tons of Democrats and Republicans eating together at Trump's club in Florida before he was the president, because no cameras were allowed in there. And they were, there wasn't all this grandstanding. Jesus doesn't grandstand. He lets the events, he lets what he's doing, he lets his miracles and his power speak for itself. Sometimes it can be hard because Jesus kind of sneaks away. Maybe this is a good point to end on. One of the things that I have tried to do in our Bible study, and as I continue to study the scriptures going forward, is I've started to think of Jesus a bit like a ninja. He's always hiding, and he's always sneaking. Because even in stories about him, it's easy for his figure to take a back seat. I think it's worthwhile as we go through these different stories to go back to them, to try and imagine them, paint a scene in your mind, paint a picture. Again, you don't necessarily have to get it exactly right. Part of me, one of my struggles is if I'm going to imagine encountering Jesus with the woman with the hemorrhage, it's I want the scene in my mind that I'm imagining to fit ancient Jerusalem. I want to have the stones in the right color and, the market stalls and have the details right. And again, I would say, if you're like me, those details are less important than encountering Christ. Whether it's getting the scene on the street correct or what the man's house looks like. One of my great questions is, what on earth do their homes look like? I would love to have pictures. Someday some of us are going to be in heaven taking pictures of all these things. That's what it was like. But you don't have to get the house right. One of the things that I thought was really hilarious about The Chosen, where you could feel this, is the story of Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law. And they have Peter's mother-in-law in this big bed with big heavy covers. And if you've ever been in Israel and it's as hot as the surface of the sun most of the years, you don't sleep in beds with big heavy covers on you. You do that when you've lived in the northern hemisphere and you know what winter is. In Israel, I think in Bethlehem it snowed 4 or 5 times since the foundation of the state of Israel in the 40s. So it's just funny because it's even in those kind of things. I think The Chosen and some of these movies and things have done a great job helping us visualize